I am so pleased to have Betsy Norris with us today from Cleveland Adoption Network. I always smile. I grew up in Cleveland, as you know, Betsy. And if I was growing old in Cleveland, I would probably be doing everything I could hands-on to support your work. I've always been absolutely enamored with what you've created in Cleveland and really for the state of Ohio, and what a leader you've been for all of us, quite a legacy. So I wonder if we could start out with your kind of choosing those things about yourself and about your organization, because you've got a big anniversary this year, that you might like people watching this to know about you and about the network.
Well, first, thank you, Sharon, both for inviting me and for the kind words. This is our 35th anniversary, and I don't know too many nonprofit founders that are still chugging away after 35 years. So it's been a real labor of love. And I think because it's personal to me, it feels like my life. It is my life. And so I feel very fortunate every day that I'm able to do work that doesn't really feel like work. There's aspects of it that do in terms of running an organization, but our mission-based work for me is just comes so naturally, and it's I love it. So it makes it easy to keep at it.
Let me interrupt you. You said it's very personal to you. So for somebody watching who doesn't know you, what does that mean?
Sure. So I'm an adoptee myself. I was born in 1960, so I grew up in the 60s and 70s when adoption was somewhat hush-hush. My family, luckily, was always really open with me about my being adopted, but I quickly learned that there were, kind of two sides of the coin, if you will. My mom and I would be out, at the store or wherever, and I had flaming red hair as a kid, and little old ladies would stop us on the street and say, "Oh, where'd she get her red hair?" And I was taught to be proud that I was adopted, and so I would just say I was adopted, and they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't mean to bring that up," and,
Yeah.
and as if I'd announced, I'm a bastard child.
Oh,
So,
whoa, okay.
so I quickly realized, like, okay, this is okay at home, but it's not okay, for some other people. And
Mhm.
so I think that juxtaposition helped shape, my thinking. And also I didn't know anything. My parents, as open as they were with me about my being adopted, they had literally no information about my background. So people would ask me all the time, "Are you Irish?" It's like, well, I don't know. I'd love to find out. I didn't know how old my birth parents had been. I didn't know anything about the circumstances. And so that really shaped my thinking. I don't think I put it in these words at the time, but as a teenager, um, I think I wondered, like, well, what's so bad about my background that even I can't know what it is? And somewhere along the line, as I matured, I realized, okay, that's the system. It's not specific to me, but still, it doesn't lead to the kind of self-esteem, that we would hope for people. And so that it just when I searched for my birth parents in my 20s in the 1980s, so pre-internet, it was a lonely journey, and I was isolated, and I worked in child mental health. I was an RN working with teenagers in an inpatient setting. And parallel to my own search and exploration, I noticed that an awful lot of the kids that found their way to needing the services that we provided at the hospital were adoptees, and nobody was really keeping statistics about it, but I kind of informally counted for a couple of years, and it was about 20%
Wow.
of the kids on our unit. And sadly, the treatment team didn't seem really all that interested in talking about it. I tried to educate people. They would tell families, like, "Oh, when Betsy's here, you should talk to her." It's like, you guys could talk to people about this too.
Right.
So I saw a real gap in service, and I thought, nobody should have to go through all this alone. So part of it was my own longing for a community, and part of it was wanting to help others, not have to go through it alone.
So then what became the mission of of the organization? I mean, you started it all by yourself 35 years ago, based on the mission and vision to do what?
So I jumped in with both feet. I tell people now I was in my 20s. I hardly knew what a nonprofit was. And I was young and naive and energetic, and it's a good thing that I was. Um, our mission, so people hear Adoption Network Cleveland and they think we're an adoption agency that places kids, and that we don't do that. But we provide support and advocacy and education for the triad and really now beyond. So adoptees, birth parents, adoptive parents, through the lifelong process. So from pre-adoption through search and reunion, and everything in between. And now encompass kinship families, people with DNA discoveries,
Wow.
any genetic identity type, family separation type issues. And so it's been really fulfilling work. We have a very inclusive attitude. I've been around long enough to watch the pendulum swing on a lot of things. And I think one thing it's kind of swung back and forth on during the time that we've been around is when I first started Adoption Network, I don't know that there were really any organizations that were on my radar, at least, that really truly served the full triad. And adoptees and birth parents were kind of over here, and adoptive parents and professionals were over there. And there was a lot of I don't know, maybe mistrust between, the different camps. And I just from the beginning felt like we're all in this together, and, we might have different angles on the issues, but they're the same issues. And if you look at kind of the power analysis, we're not going to create sustained change by piecemealing it. We need everybody's voice at the table, and those adoptive parents who are raising the next generation of adoptees have the chance to make that different. And
Yes.
those professionals who are shaping policy, I jumped into policy in Ohio right away before I had an idea what I was doing. But I just, my goal has always been to change the world, at least in my little corner of it. And I'm proud to say that we've accomplished some of that. And there's always more to do.
You actually changed the law in Ohio, didn't you?
We've changed several laws in Ohio. The big one was access to records. Yeah. So in Ohio, much to my surprise, people who were adopted before 1964 always had access to their birth certificates. I say to my surprise because I was searching for almost a year before I realized that I'm a pre-64 adoptee, and it was a little known fact. But I just thought, so I was able to get my birth certificate once I figured it out. But I just thought, that is so unfair to people who were just a few years younger than me that can't get this document that was so important for my identity. And so I jumped in with both feet, and in the 1980s, it was an idea whose time had not come, and we got shot down over and over again. But I knew it was right, and I kept coming back, and we had multiple bills over the years. And finally, the bill that we had in 2013. So this goes from 1988 to 2013, like 25 years. That bill really got a lot of momentum. And at that point, the legislators were saying, well, why is this inequity? Why does this exist? We should change this. So people have really come around finally in the end. So that bill opened up records in Ohio to 400,000 adoptees.
Wow.
So it was huge. And a lot of them came out of the woodwork and came and celebrated with us. And so that was 8 years ago that we had our opening day. In 2015, there was a 15-month period before it was fully implemented. But that was definitely a peak experience. Yeah.
Oh, and my goodness, so much to be proud of. So many states have not been able to reach that goal yet. Does it also give access for birth first parents?
It does not. And so that, like I said, there's always more that we could do. And there's Ohio law, unfortunately, was very convoluted and had pre-64 was always open. And then in 96, they changed it prospectively, but with some caveats that we're not wild about. And so it's the period of time that we got changed to be fully open was 64 to 96. And we're actually hopefully coming back this year to do 96 forward, and we'll see how that works. But our first bills were written in a way that they would have benefited the adoptee and the birth parent. And the adoptive parent. Our first proposal was that the original birth certificate would be available to the adoptive parents through the childhood of the adoptee. On turning 18, revert to the adoptee directly, and then to the birth parents. I can't remember if it was at 18 or 21 that they could get the amended birth record. And that was complicated, and that's another place where I think the pendulum swung a lot as other states were seeking laws. Most of them were focused on the adoptee. That's where the momentum seemed to be. And in some ways, I don't know, because it's the adoptee's birth, record of their birth.
Their heritage. Yeah.
So it's an easy, the more obvious argument maybe for the legislators.
So what is it about you? Obviously, you're a fighter, you're persistent, you're bright. You must be a really good learner, because you came into all this from an RN background and kind of, as you said, jumped in your 20s. And obviously being an adoptee gave you the motivation. But that doesn't mean that you were able to stay in the game this long without some other attributes or supports. What's allowed you to do this? If somebody said, oh, I want to do that, what would your advice be to them?
A couple things. One is, and yes, I had the motivation to teach myself a lot of things. I remember looking up, like, how do you write a press release? Like, I don't know, following the directions. A lot of time at the library. But I think my adoptive father, so my dad, was a really good role model. He was the type of person who jumped in. He founded our public radio station in Cleveland. Cleveland was the last market that didn't have a public radio station, and he thought we should have one. And so instead of waiting for somebody to do something, he fought for that. And it took 10 years for them to get the station and go on the air and raise all the money and all that. And he did some other things, environmental causes and other things. And so I had a really good role model of, you jump in and you work to make things that you want in your community a reality. And he was very helpful to me through the process of our founding in the organization and also the legislation. Wow. And I think, and this might be counterintuitive, but I think I'm an introvert. And I think that has benefited probably both me and the organization. Especially early in the organization, I would watch different organizations and kind of how they were structured and how things worked. And a lot of times it was centered on one kind of dynamic leader or one person who, was the inspiration, and ours was too in a certain way. But I have forced myself to take the limelight when I need to, when I feel like it's in the benefit of the organization, but I'm very comfortable taking a back seat and letting other people shine. But I watched a lot of organizations kind of burn out because, there was one person, they didn't have a whole lot of other people involved in, carrying the load and making it all happen. And then if that person burned out or something happened to them, then that was the end of that, and I just thought that was important from the beginning, that it would be a group effort. And my goal has always been to build an organization that will, live long beyond my tenure here. We have an endowment, so when the day comes that I retire, I fully expect the Adoption Network will keep going, and, it'll morph and change with time, and that's great, and it should.
Wow, you just shared something nobody else has talked about, and that really is the personality of the leader, and how that infuses the strength of the organization. So I really thank you for that perspective.
I think along with that, maybe, trying hard to not have ego involved, again, looking at other organizations, or sometimes people's ego gets in the way, and so just being aware of that and trying hard not to have that be the case, or inviting people to tell me if they think I've crossed that line.
Well, I would imagine, because a lot of times you tried and failed, that if you'd taken all that personally, you would have been deterred from the long term goal.
Yep. It's
So
not about me. Yeah.
yeah,
It's about
yeah,
what we're trying to accomplish.
yeah, yes. Thank you for saying that. That's really wonderful. What keeps you busy out there in a larger way? What kind of is the are the inspirations and the joys that you get outside of the work with the network?
I have a son who's 25 and so successfully raised and launched, and he's a musician and an artist and working, doing graphic design. He's an art director for an advertising agency in New York City. Um,
Wow.
so that's been a huge part of my life. I like to travel. I like to, I do yoga, I hike. I do work a lot, but you know, I definitely, want that balance to have time to do other things as well. And that's really important.
Yeah, I would say that for you to have successfully led an organization for 35 years, you'd have to have some balance or you could easily burn out. It sounds like you've been pretty good with that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I stay busy with I have a very complicated family. I've got my birth family. My birth parents were married when I found them and have had three kids that they raised. And so, I've incorporated them into my family, my adoptive family. And then my adoptive parents got divorced when I was 10 and my dad remarried. So I have stepmother and siblings as well. And my birth mother is the only of my five parents that is still living. But I've got, three different sets of siblings, my adoptive siblings, my birth siblings, my step siblings. Some are in Canada, some are, across the country. And
Wow.
so, so a lot of my travel is, staying connected with people.
And how is that? What have you learned from that? I mean, are they friendly with each other? Do they all feel just connected to you, or do they feel connected to each other? How do you balance all that, Betsy?
Um, well, one of the most special pieces of my reunion was I very much wanted my birth parents and my adoptive parents to meet. And I know for some adoptees that's something they want, for others it's a nightmare, but it was really something that, if they were up for it, I wanted to make that happen. And I just feel so fortunate. They were all up for it. They met many times over the years that they were living and really considered each other extended family through me, which is they are. And so that validated my reality, my identity. Watching my birth mother and my adoptive mother meet and hug and shed tears and thank each other for the parts of my life that they had each, respectively had like made me whole in a way that I didn't even know was missing until I saw it happen.
Wow.
Um, and so to really be able to live into that and stay connected with all my siblings, through my birth parents through the years that they were living. It's just, it's very important. And, to me, family is really important. And so you don't have to agree with people on everything, there's that unconditional love there for me with people I'm related to,
Did your parents adopt other children?
Yes, I have two brothers. I'm a middle child. I've got an older brother and a younger brother in my adoptive family. And then I've got three birth brothers, two of whom are identical twins. And then I've got three step siblings who are all a little bit older than my adoptive sibling set, and they live in Canada.
And do you see yourself in the others at all? Anybody else with the red hair?
I had two grandparents with red hair. So my birth mother and father both have, kind of freckles in my complexion, but neither of them had like red hair. But his father and her mother, who unfortunately were deceased by the time the reunion took place. So those were the two grandparents I didn't get to meet. But it's been interesting to watch my biological brother's age. I think personally that we look more like each other now than we did when we were younger. But I probably look more like both of our birth parents and even the three of them that were raised by them.
Wow.
As many people say, mannerisms, just, I don't know, thought processes, we have a lot in common.
And how's that make you feel? How's that changed you?
it was validating, over and over through the years. It's validating. I look in the mirror now. My birth mother's 84. I'm 63. I look in the mirror and for better or worse, I see her, like as I age and see the signs of age, I see her face when I look in the mirror. And so just the other day I was thinking about that, like if I had never met her, hadn't known her all these years, I think I'd view myself very differently.
Yeah.
And there'd still be those mysteries. My reunion, my search was when I was 25, and then I met them finally when I was 26. And there was something about, growing up and going through adolescence. And, as we recognize now that people are not fully out of adolescence until their mid-20s. I think that was very true for me. And I couldn't make that move from adolescence to adulthood without doing a search. It was so deeply embedded. It was such a need for me.
Wow, very powerful statement. Thank you. Thank you, Betsy. So you've founded this incredible, solid organization, and you've raised a son who's out there functioning well in the world, and you've reintegrated your family system. What advice, you've got a lot of wisdom. So what kinds of thoughts for somebody watching this, prospective adoptive parents, adopted people, any members of the constellation who are involved, personally or professionally, what do you want them to take away from this interview? What would be your words of wisdom?
I think one piece is that sometimes it takes a really long time to see results or, get where you are trying to go. And so to be in it for the long haul and, stay with it. Building community with other people who have the same lived experience, that our collective voice, I think, is so powerful. So creating opportunities for people with lived experience to come together and to find ways for their voices to be heard. I think our voices are louder together than individually, and that's really what's going to create change. And so that's probably one of the things I'm most proud of Adoption Network. I feel like we've been able to create a community where there really wasn't one. In the 1980s, you couldn't just Google, where are these other people, and now there's, and I look at that's why we've been able to accomplish. People see me as the founder, and yeah, I guess I am, but it's it's been a collective journey in so many ways, and that's really important.
Ooh. I love listening to your perspective because it's open-hearted, it's inclusive, and those are bywords today all across the world, and you've been practicing it for a long time, and therefore we're able to create some real substance and change. When you're thinking about retiring someday, what's the big work that still needs to be done as an adoptee, as the head of a big, powerful organization in a state? What do you think the future still needs to shift around?
I think even after all these years, a lot of people don't have a balanced view of the lifelong process of adoption for all the parties involved. We're working in Ohio on, we just finished some recommendations because Ohio is going to have a big bill on adoption this year. And I haven't seen what they put in the bill yet, but a lot of our recommendations circled around what's good for birth parents or prospective birth parents, what would be good for that adoptee whose life is being shaped by this, and I would venture to say that a lot of the powers that be maybe are looking at it like, how do we make adoption easier and better for the adoptive parents? How do we get that baby or that child into the family and call it a day? And I just think there's so much more to it than that. And so the work, sadly, is almost endless. I always think, as a leader of a nonprofit organization, I think a nonprofit organization your goal really is to put yourself out of business if you can, right? And so for any nonprofit, whatever your mission is, if you've solved the problem or the problems that you were there to address, then that's the ultimate success. And we've done a lot. I know there were some people that said, okay, you got the records open, you can dissolve now. And it's like, no, there's so much more to it than that. And so part of it is that, a big part of it is that inclusive attitude. Are we really seeing the impact of some of these decisions or some of these policies on people long term, on all of the people, even the people you might not consciously be thinking they're impacting?
Thank you. So when you retire and when you're old, and maybe even when you've passed, what words would you like people to use on your gravestone or in your obituary? What do you want them to say about Betsy Norris?
Mm-hmm. That I cared a lot about people. I cared deeply about people. Going back to what I was saying about having created a community, I think that's important to me. That I stuck with it long enough to make a difference.
Yes. Yeah, you didn't give up.
Yeah.
Betsy, thank you. I hope that you continue to do your work for many, many years to come, and that other people reach out to you to learn how to build similar, solid, healthy organizations to change policy and practice around the country, because you're a great teacher in that regard. So I thank you very, very much for joining us today and making your wisdom available on the NCAP site. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sharon. This has been wonderful. I really enjoy the opportunity, and it's great to see you as always.
Thank you. Thank you.